You're telling me humans have just been watching this whole time? The room fell into a stunned silence as General Corvo of the Zin Consortium stared at the shifting holographic map before him. Every known species in the intergalactic coalition had already poured their entire strength into the war effort, draining their resources in the prolonged and brutal conflict against the Qadari. And yet somewhere on the periphery, humanity had lingered, present but curiously passive. They had offered aid, certainly, logistics, supplies, medical support, but not once had a human warship entered the fray. Until now. Yes, General. Admiral Merrick of the Rachak Union responded, his scaled features unreadable. Humanity officially declared active engagement in combat operations exactly 10 minutes ago. Corvo rubbed at his temples, trying to process the information. He had heard whispers, tales of human military capability, whispers he had always dismissed as bravado typical of Deathworlders. But now, faced with the reality, he felt an unsettling blend of skepticism and curiosity. Why now? And more importantly, what could they possibly hope to accomplish in a war that had ground on for years? "Show me their initial deployments," Corvo ordered, his voice sharper than intended. The holographic display zoomed in on the contested sectors along the Qadari front. Their forces had constructed formidable defense grids across the KR, systems daring anyone to breach them. And there, at the edge of the battlefield, blips began to appear. Humanity's fleet had arrived, small, precise, almost laughably underwhelming against the monstrous scale of the enemy armadas. As the human vessels appeared in formation, hushed whispers began to ripple through the room. The ships were sleek, compact, lacking the exaggerated scale and bristling weapon arrays that most coalition species favored. To the untrained eye, they looked woefully unprepared. "That's it?" someone muttered with disbelief. Corvo narrowed his eyes. There was no theatrical display of power, no sweeping fleet maneuvers, just a lone command vessel, a handful of destroyers, and a support screen of escort frigates. It was barely a fraction of a standard battle group. The room held its breath. The Qadari responded almost immediately, adjusting their frontline units to meet the newcomers. They saw no reason to treat the human fleet as a serious threat. No other force had managed to breach their lines in years. Then it began. Corvo blinked, uncertain if he was seeing things correctly. The human ships moved, not lumbering into formation, like most coalition navies, but with sharp surgical precision. They sliced through space with alarming grace. Within moments, the coalition's comms channels lit up with urgent chatter, electromagnetic interference, sensor disruptions, signals vanishing or corrupting entirely. For the Qadari, it must have felt like fighting blindfolded in a storm. What are they doing?" Admiral Merrick asked, his typically calm tone edged with disbelief. "Electronic warfare," Corvo replied, but even he sounded unsure. "But I've never seen anything on this scale." The Qadari fleet faltered as targeting arrays failed, defensive systems flickered and died, and command chains dissolved into confusion. Human ships moved like predators through the chaos, launching high-velocity kinetic projectiles in coordinated volleys. This was not the brute force warfare the coalition had grown accustomed to. It was something altogether different. Lethal, elegant, warfare reduced to a kind of dreadful ballet. "Sir, Qadari outer defenses are collapsing," a comms officer called out, eyes wide as data streamed in. Corvo leaned forward, transfixed by the tactical display. Would the humans press their advantage or withdraw after the demonstration? The question answered itself within seconds. The human formation accelerated, driving deep into the heart of the Qadari lines, exploiting every opening with unnerving speed. Their tactics shifted in real time, outmaneuvering each attempt at counteraction. "How are they?" Morak, a senior strategist, began only to trail off, watching another sector fall. "It's like they know exactly where to hit," someone whispered. Corvo didn't disagree. He watched, awestruck, as the human fleet moved with machine-like coordination. Their attacks were surgical, precision. Strikes aimed not at enemy hulls, but at communications, propulsion, energy relays. The Kidari fleet began to unravel, thrashing like a behemoth stripped of its senses. "What kind of weapons are they using?" another officer blurted, torn between horror and fascination. "Conventional," a tactical analyst stammered. "But they're using them in ways we never imagined." As the minutes ticked by, the Coalition's command center descended into stunned silence. 1 hour. It had only been 1 hour since humanity's first official combat deployment, and already the once mighty Kidari fleets were reduced to a scattering of retreating ships. Their battle lines shattered beyond recognition. Even the most optimistic Coalition models had not predicted this. Corvo watched as stronghold after stronghold flickered and vanished from the map. He wasn't just witnessing a battle. This was the arrival of a new force entirely. It was a dissection. The humans weren't merely overpowering the enemy, they were tearing apart the Kadar's entire battle. "Doctrine Sector Gamma has fallen," the comms officer announced, breaking the silence, "and reports indicate no human losses impossible." Morak his scaled features, twitching in disbelief. "How can they sustain 0 casualties?" Corvo swallowed hard, his eyes locked onto the tactical feed. The human fleet continued its relentless advance, their ships weaving through debris fields and evading incoming fire with an ease that seemed almost playful as another Kidari command ship was reduced to a ball of flame. It became evident that this was no fluke. The humans were not just skilled, they were on a completely different level. "I don't understand," Corvo admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "What have they been doing all this time? If not fighting, preparing a new voice?" Sea and cold and analytical, all heads turned to see a human officer standing at the doorway, clad in a crisp uniform devoid of ornamentation. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, scanned the room, as if assessing each individual's worth. "You call this a war?" He continued, striding forward to the center of the room. "But Tus, it's an exercise, a test of tactical adaptability," the Coalition officers exchange. Uncertain glances, the human's tone was neither boastful nor arrogant. It was matter-of-fact. Corvo clenched his jaw, unsure whether to feel anger or grudging admiration. "What's your objective, Corvo?" demanded, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Why now?" The human officer tilted his head slightly, as if considering how to best explain something painfully. "Obvious. Our objective," he began, "is to end this conflict in the most efficient manner possible. And as for why now, we waited until you were ready to accept our methods." Corvo felt a shiver run down his spine. The words were simple, almost benign, yet they carried a weight that suggested something far beyond what any of them had anticipated. "Ready, you think? We were ready for this." Mars scoffed, shaking his head. The human's gaze turned to the holographic map, where the last remnants of the Kidari forces were being systematically dismantled. "If you weren't," he replied calmly, "this war would have ended much sooner." Corvo stared at the map, struggling to process the unfolding events. The humans were pushing toward the heart of Kadri territory, their advance so rapid it defied explanation. And yet, as he watched, thought began to form a question that he wasn't sure he wanted the answer to. Just what kind of war had humanity been preparing? For all this time, Corvo's eyes stayed fixed on the holographic display play as the humans pressed deeper into Kidari territory. The Coalition commanders around him remained silent, transfixed by the near absurdity unfolding before them. The human fleet wasn't just fighting, it was dissecting, its opponents exploiting every weakness with a precision that bordered on supernatural. "Report," barked Admiral Marek, breaking the silence. "What's the status of the CER Central Command?" The tactical officer's eyes darted. between screens, hands trembling as he processed the incoming data. Central Command, it's failing, sir. The humans have neutralized their shield arrays and they're launching boarding pods as we speak. Corvo felt his jaw clench involuntarily. The Qadari. Central Command was a fortress protected by layers of defenses that had held against every coalition assault for years. Now those defenses were failing one by one, like brittle glass under a relentless hammer. Boarding pods. Merrick echoed his tone, a mixture of disbelief and horror. They're going inside. The human officer standing nearby merely nodded, his expression impassive. Yes. He said simply, we find that surgical strikes are more effective than brute force. Our objective is to seize control, not annihilate. It kvoglensed at the officer, unable to suppress a sense of dread. These human, with their calm demeanor and deliberate actions, were nothing like the rabbit warriors he had expected. They were methodical, calculating, and frighteningly detached from the chaos they were orchestrating. How are they managing this? Another coalition commander asked, his voice shaky. We've been fighting the Qadari for years and barely dented their defenses, and now this training, the human officer replied. Matter-of-factly, we've trained for scenarios like this long before we even encountered the Qadari space warfare ground combat electronic countermeasures. It's all part of the doctrine. Doctrine, Corvo repeated, narrowing his eyes. You make it sound like you expected this war. The human officer turned to face Corvo, his expression betraying nothing expected, number prepared for always the response. And a chill through the room. The coalition had gone to war out of necessity, driven by a desperate need to defend their territories from the Qadari onslaught. But the humans, they had been preparing for war as if it were an inevitability. And now, as Corvo watched, the human fleet systematically dismantled the Qadari defenses, he realized that this was not just a show of military might, it was a demonstration of control. General Corvo, a voice crackled through the command room speakers, interrupting his thoughts. It was one of the coalition's reconnaissance officers stationed near the Qaeda border. The Qaeda flagship is moving. It's trying to retreat to a more fortified sector, let me guess, Marek said, his tone laced with bitter sarcasm. The humans have already anticipated that the human officer didn't so much as blink. Of course they'll allow the flagship to retreat for now. It's an old tactic. Push them to their last bastion where they feel safe, then remove even that sense of security. Corvo couldn't believe what he was hearing. You're toying with them. Haste, incredulous, not toying. The human officer corrected, his voice devoid of emotion. We're ensuring that when they fall completely. No room for recovery, no chance to regroup. This war has dragged, and because everyone fought piecemeal, we don't. Corvo turned back to the map, watching as the Qadari fleet scrambled to reposition. Panic had clearly set in. The humans had broken the unspoken rules of this conflict, operating on a level that the Qadar had never encountered before. As more sectors fell under human control, it became evident that the Qadari weren't just losing a battle, they were being undone. We're getting reports of ground operations, the tactical officer announced, eyes wide with shock. The humans have deployed their soldiers to key Qadari planets. Morak let out a loud hiss. How are they already launching ground assaults we've barely established? Space superiority, the human officer crossed his arms, eyes glued to the map. Parallel operations while space forces disrupt and dismantle enemy fleets. Ground units secure key installations. We trained for this, to overwhelm on multiple fronts. Simultaneously, Corvo felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Every coalition force had focused on one front at a time, struggling to balance the demands of space and ground combat. But the humans, they seem to have mastered both, executing their plan with a level of coordination that bore ordered on. Inhuman ground reports coming in. The comms officer said, his voice barely above a whisper. The humans have neutralized the Qadari planetary defenses. No significant Resistance Corvo nearly choked on his disbelief. The Cateri planets were fortresses shielded and armed to the teeth. Coalition forces had tried for months, if not years, to breach them with little to show for their efforts. Yet here were the humans, taking those planets in mere moments. "What kind of soldiers are they?" someone muttered, voicing the question that lingered in every mind. "Our soldiers are adaptable," the human officer replied, his tone suggesting that the answer was self-evident. "We trained them, not just to fight, but to think, to analyze, adapt and exploit weaknesses." In real time, a hush settled over the room. As the coalition officers absorbed this, the humans had turned war into a science one, where victory was less about raw power and more about precision at waste. Terrifying. "What's their next move?" Corvo found himself asking, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "The flagship," the human officer replied without hesitation. "They'll let it retreat, and then they'll cut off every route back to safety. Once isolated, the Kadari command will have no choice but to surrender or be wiped out. So that's it?" Merrick questioned, eyes wide. "They're already in, anticipating the endgame." Anticipating, the human officer smirked, a flicker of something almost resembling amusement crossing his face for the first time. "No, they're enacting it. This war was over the moment we entered the coalition." Commanders exchanged uneasy glances. It wasn't just the humans' tactics or technology that unsettled them. It was their attitude. They approached war as if it were an equation to be solved, each variable accounted for, each outcome calculated. The room fell silent again as the humans continued their advance. More Kari worlds went dark. On the map, one after another, like star swinking. Out in a vast night sky, the holographic display now showed the Kadari flagship retreating toward its last stronghold, pursued not by a swarm of human ships, but by a calculated, relentless force. "What happens if the Kadari surrender?" Corvo asked, almost dreading the answer. The human officer's eyes narrowed. "Then they live," he said. "Simply, we don't fight to terminate, we fight to win, and to make sure no one ever thinks of challenging us again." Corvo nodded, swallowing hard. There was a cold logic to it, a ruthlessness that defied everything he had ever known about warfare. The humans had entered the battlefield, not just to win, but to define what winning meant. As the map continued to shift, the Kadar's last bastion on the brink of collapse, Corvo couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger, and he had no idea what that something was. The room was cloaked in a tense silence as the holographic display revealed the final stages of the human offensive. The Kadari flagship, once a symbol of indomitable power, now appeared small and insignificant as it limped toward its last fortified sector. Its hull was scarred from earlier engagements, thrusters flickering erratically, and its once mighty escorts were little more than debris scattered across space. Kor glanced around the command center where coalition officers sat in stunned disbelief. Some were expressions of awe, others fear, but none could hide their fascination with the humans' unfolding strategy. A mere 5 hours ago, the Kadari had been considered unbeatable. Now their defeat seemed not only possible, but inevitable. Human fleet is closing in on the flagships. Fallback point, reported the tactical officer. His voice was shaky as if he himself couldn't quite grasp what was happening. "They've surrounded the sector, blocking every escape route." "Any signs of Kidari reinforcements?" Corvo asked, though he suspected the answer. "None, sir. The humans, they've already crippled their supply lines and reserve forces," the officer replied, shaking his head in disbelief. "It's over. They have nowhere left to run." Corvo watched as the human ships formed a precise encirclement around the flagship's final refuge. They made no grand gestures, issued no ultimatums. They merely waited their formation, a silent declaration of dominance. It was a statement as clear as if it had been spoken aloud. "There is no escape." The human officer, still standing calmly among the coalition commanders, tilted his head slightly. "We've Transmitted terms of surrender, he announced the Qadari have 5 minutes to comply, otherwise we proceed with final neutralization. Ma let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the display. And if they don't surrender, he challenged, unable to mask his disdain. You just wipe them out. The human officer's gaze remained impassive. If they choose to reject the terms, then yes, he replied evenly, but understand our goal is not destruction, it's resolution, the end of a conflict so decisively that it cannot resume. Kevo felt a knot in his stomach. The humans operated on an entirely different wavelength, where war was not about glory or honor, but about efficiency and finality. They didn't leave room for ambiguity. In their hands, war was a tool to enforce peace, to sculpt the galaxy into a shape where resistance was simply impractical. The Qadari flagship is responding. The comms officer cut in tension, lacing his voice. They're requesting terms. A murmur ran through the coalition command room. Could it be after years of war? Was it really coming to an end? Put it on, Corvo ordered, trying to maintain an air of authority, despite the surreal situation. The holographic display shifted to show the bridge of the Qadari flagship. The Qadari commander appeared on screen, eyes burning with a mixture of rage and fear. His uniform was disheveled, his once imposing demeanor reduced to a semblance of controlled panic. We acknowledge your terms, human. The commander spat, his voice trembling. But know this, you have only won through trickery and deceit, not strength. The human officer stepped forward, his expression unchanged. You lost because you relied on old doctrines, outdated bions, he said calmly. Strength lies not in brute force, but in adaptability, in understanding every facet of conflict. Offered you a chance to end this peacefully long before today you chose. Otherwise, the Qaeda commander glared, his defiance hanging by a thread for armament. It seemed he might lash out, reject the terms out of sheer spite. But then he glanced around. His own bridge at the faces of his officers in the weight of reality settled in the humans, had cornered them, stripped them of every advantage, and now held the galaxy's attention on this final moment very well. The commander muttered, bowing his head, "We surrender." A wave of shock rippled through the coalition command room. It was over just like that. Years of grueling conflict, countless lives lost, and endless resources expended had culminated in a surrender within 5 hours of humanity entering the fray. The sheer finality of it left Corvo momentarily speechless. Transmission confirmed. The show's officer announced, barely containing his own surprise, the Qadari have ordered all remaining forces to stand down. The human officer nodded, turning to the coalition commanders. The war is now officially concluded, he stated simply. Our ships will begin the stabilization process for Qadari systems, and coalition forces are free to withdraw to their respective territories. Corvo opened his mouth to speak, but words failed him. It felt surreal. The Qadari were defeated not in a drawn-out campaign, but in a surgical strike that lasted mere hours. Humanity had achieved in one engagement what the rest of the galaxy had failed to accomplish over years. But more than that, they had reshaped the entire concept of war. How Corvo finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. How did you prepare for something like this, to end a war so swiftly? The human officer regarded him with an inscrutable gaze. We come from a world where conflict is an inherent part of existence, he explained. Survival demanded we learn to adapt, to innovate, and to end threats with finality. War is not our goal. It's a means to an end, a peace that others will think twice about disturbing. Corvo nodded, absorbing the words. It wasn't just about power. It was about understanding, about preparing for every eventuality. Humanity had honed their methods, trained their minds, and embraced a brutal efficiency that set them apart. They hadn't merely joined the war, they'd transcended it, revealing That victory was not a matter of who fought the longest, but who fought the smartest as the coalition officers dispersed. Corvo watched the human fleet regroup on the holographic map. They moved with the same quiet precision as they had during the battle. Now shifting to their post. War objective stabilization, reconstruct Ion. They were not conquerors basking in glory, they were pragmatists, already setting the groundwork for what came next for the first time in years. Corvo felt a strange sense of hope, mingled. With an edge of fear, humanity had shown what they were capable of, and the galaxy would never be the same. They'd rewritten the rules of war, and in doing so, had forged a path toward a peace that could last. The war had ended, not with a grand finale, but with aerialization, that humanity in its calculated brilliance had always known exactly when and how to win.